A sales and use tax exemption was created for the sale of building materials sold to a construction contractor who is performing a real property construction activity for certain exempt entities. This video will discuss the criteria for that exemption. Before we discuss the building materials exemption for contracts with exempt entities, let us first discuss the general sales and use tax rules for a contractor doing work for an exempt entity customer. The tax treatment depends on whether the contractor is providing sales of or services to personal property for an exempt entity, or whether the contractor is performing a real property construction activity for an exempt entity. If you don't know whether the job relates to personal property or real property, please refer to the chart in the back of Publication 207, Sales and Use Tax Information for Contractors. When a contractor is providing sales of or services to personal property for an exempt entity, this is a special situation where there is no tax. The contractor purchases materials physically transferred to the customer without tax for resale. The contractor will obtain a fully completed exemption certificate from the exempt entity customer within 90 days of the sale. Upon receipt of that exemption certificate, the contractor does not charge the exempt entity sales tax on the services to personal property. Now let's look at a contractor that is performing a real property construction activity for an exempt entity that does not meet the criteria for the building materials exemption. The contractor's charges to its customer for a real property improvement are not subject to sales tax. The contractor is the consumer of the materials used to make the real property improvement. The contractor pays tax on its purchase of the materials. Or, the exempt entity may purchase materials directly from a third-party supplier. An exempt entity's purchase of materials is exempt from tax. The contractor can coordinate the purchase. This means the contractor can fill out a purchase order on behalf of the exempt entity or create a materials list to provide the supplier. However, the purchaser listed on the purchase order must be the exempt entity. The exempt entity must make the payment to the third-party supplier. The contractor cannot be the owner or former owner of the materials that are used in making the real property improvement. The contractor cannot sell materials to the exempt entity and then install them and claim resale on its purchase of those materials. However, the contractor can use two separate legal entities where one sells the materials and the other installs the materials. This creates the third-party supplier. As long as the installing contractor never owned the materials supply company may purchase the materials that it sells directly to the exempt entity without tax for resale. It is important to realize that, for sales tax purposes, Wisconsin does not treat a single owner entity that is disregarded for income or franchise tax purposes to be a separate legal entity. If the materials supply company is a disregarded entity of the installing company, the materials supply company may not purchase the materials without tax for resale. The installing company must pay tax on its purchase of materials used in making a real property improvement. To make things easier for contractors doing real property construction activities for certain exempt entities, an exemption was created. The goal of this exemption was to allow a contractor to purchase materials without tax for resale, without having to create a separate entity or coordinate purchases on behalf of the customer. Effective for contracts dated January 1, 2016 and thereafter, a sales and use tax exemption was created for the sale of building materials sold to a construction contractor who, in fulfillment of a real property construction activity, transfers the building materials to a qualifying exempt entity if the building materials become part of a facility in Wisconsin owned by the exempt entity. Within the exemption, 3 qualifying criteria must be met in order for the contractor performing a real property construction activity to qualify for exemption on its purchase of materials. These criteria are: 1. The construction contract must be for a qualifying exempt entity. 2. The property must become part of a facility in Wisconsin that is owned by the exempt entity. And 3. The property must be transferred to the qualifying exempt entity. Next, we will discuss these 3 criteria and how they are applied. The first criteria is that the real property construction activity must be for a qualifying exempt entity. A qualifying exempt entity is any county, city, village, or town within Wisconsin, any public school district within Wisconsin, a county city hospital established under Section 660927 Wisconsin statutes, a sewerage commission organized under Section 281-43-4 Wisconsin statutes, a metropolitan sewerage district, any joint local water authority, any nonprofit organization that holds a Wisconsin Certificate of Exempt Status, a Certificate of Exempt Status number, a non-Wisconsin nonprofit organization if it is organized and operated exclusively for religious, charitable, scientific, or educational purposes, or for the prevention of cruelty to children or animals, except hospital service insurance corporations, and no part of the net income inures to the benefit of any private stockholder, shareholder, member, or corporation. The criteria in numbers 7 and 8 nearly mirrors the IRS criteria to qualify as an exempt organization under Section 501c3 of the Internal Revenue Code. The organization may have a federal determination letter stating such. A non-Wisconsin organization is not required to obtain a Wisconsin Certificate of Exempt Status number to be a qualifying entity for this exemption. Effective for contracts entered into July 1, 2018 and thereafter, the building materials exemption for contracts with exempt entities is expanded to include as qualifying exempt entities technical colleges, any institution or campus in the University of Wisconsin system, and the University of Wisconsin Extension. Also, a state veterans organization. A state veterans organization means the Wisconsin State Organization or a Department of National Veterans Organization incorporated by an act of Congress. Retroactively for contracts entered into on September 1, 2017 and thereafter, a qualifying exempt entity includes holding companies which are all of the following: organized under Section 501c2 of the Internal Revenue Code, exempt from federal income tax under Section 501a Internal Revenue Code, organized for the exclusive purpose of holding title to property, collecting income from that property, and turning over the entire amount of that income, less expenses, to any corporation, community trust fund, foundation, or association, organized and operated exclusively for religious, charitable, scientific, or educational purposes, or for the prevention of cruelty to children or animals, except hospital service insurance corporations. No part of the net income of which inures to the benefit of any private stockholder, shareholder, member, or corporation. A note of caution: not all nonprofit organizations that are exempt from federal income and franchise taxes are qualifying exempt entities for the purpose of this exemption. Be sure to obtain the entity's Certificate of Exempt Status number to verify that it is a qualifying entity. Some examples of non-qualifying entities are chambers of commerce, professional organizations, or labor organizations. This exemption also does not apply to materials used in facilities constructed for the following entities, even if the entity holds a Wisconsin Certificate of Exempt Status number: a non-Wisconsin city, village, or town, a non-Wisconsin public school district, a state governmental unit. This applies to both Wisconsin and non-Wisconsin state governmental units. A public college, university, or technical college. As a reminder, Wisconsin public colleges, universities, and technical colleges are qualifying entities for contracts entered into July 1, 2018 and thereafter. A federal governmental unit. A Wisconsin nonprofit organization that does not hold a Wisconsin Certificate of Exempt Status number, and individual Native American tribal members. For these non-qualifying exempt entities, the contractor would use the general sales and use tax treatment we discussed at the start of this video. The second criteria to qualify for this exemption is that the materials used in real property construction activity for the exempt entity must become part of a facility. Facility means a building or shelter, a parking lot or parking garage, an athletic field or athletic park, or a storm sewer, water supply system, or sewage and wastewater treatment facility. A facility is not a highway, street, or road, or anything not specifically identified as a facility. The meaning of facility is strictly construed for this exemption. A sidewalk is not a building or shelter, parking lot or parking garage, athletic field or athletic park, storm sewer, water supply system, or sewage and wastewater treatment facility. Therefore, the sidewalk materials purchased by a contractor for these items do not qualify for the exemption. The sidewalk materials do not qualify for the exemption even if the sidewalk runs through a parking lot. A sidewalk is not specifically identified as a facility. The third criteria is that the property must be transferred to the qualifying exempt entity. This means that at the end of the construction contract, the ownership of the property that became part of the facility located in Wisconsin is transferred to that qualifying exempt entity. This allows for the exemption to apply to materials purchased by subcontractors when the other criteria of the exemption are met. This may create situations where purchases of materials made by other entities qualify for the exemption. For example, the Wisconsin Department of Transportation has a contract with a municipality to replace water infrastructure as part of its highway project. Department of Transportation obtains a contractor to do the water infrastructure portion of the project. Department of Transportation is a state government entity and is not a qualifying entity. However, the contractor may purchase the materials without tax if the original contract between the qualifying entity, which is the municipality, and the Department of Transportation meets the criteria for the exemption. The contract must be dated January 1st, 2016 or thereafter. Upon completion of the highway project, the property, the water infrastructure, transfers to the municipality. Let's look at some examples where the property is not transferred to the qualifying exempt entity at the completion of the construction. A private developer has a contract dated March of 2017 with the municipality to build a parking garage. The municipality is a qualifying entity. The contract is dated after January 1st of 2016, and a parking garage is a qualifying facility. In the contract, the private developer will operate the parking garage for 2 years prior to transferring the property to the municipality. Since the property did not transfer to the qualifying exempt entity at the completion of the project, the private developer's contract does not meet the criteria to qualify for the building materials exemption. Another example is of a county hospital that leases the building that it uses. The hospital is adding a cancer treatment wing to the building. A contract dated after January 1st, 2016 is entered into with a general contractor to complete the construction. This expansion does not qualify since the county hospital does not own the building and property. Rather, the hospital is leasing the building. This law applies to contracts entered into on January 1st, 2016 and thereafter. The contract date that this is based on is the original contract date with the qualifying exempt entity. So in the previous examples we discussed, the original contract date was between the municipality and the Department of Transportation. It is not based on the date of the contract between Department of Transportation and the contractor hired to do the water infrastructure work. The exemption does not apply if the contractor purchases property after January 1st, 2016 for a contract that was entered into prior to January 1st of 2016. It is not based on the date materials were purchased. A change order to a contract amends the original contract but does not nullify the original contract or change that date the contract was entered into. If a contract between the contractor and exempt entity was irrevocably entered into prior to January 1st of 2016, the exemption does not apply to materials purchased to fulfill the contract. If a contract was not irrevocable and the original contract is canceled and a new contract is entered into on January 1st, 2016 or thereafter, the materials used to fulfill the new contract may qualify for the exemption. The contract entered into date is different for contracts with certain exempt qualifying entities. These entities and contract entered into dates are as follows. For contracts entered into on September 1st, 2017 and thereafter, a qualifying exempt entity will include 501c2 holding companies. For contracts entered into on July 1st, 2018 and thereafter, a qualifying exempt entity will include technical colleges, the University of Wisconsin System, and the University of Wisconsin Extension. Also, a state veterans organization. This exemption is for the contractor's purchase of materials that become part of a facility. Remember that a contractor is deemed the consumer of materials used in real property construction activities. Therefore, the contractor is liable for any use tax, interest, and penalties owed as a result of not properly documenting that it qualified for this exemption or for using the exemption improperly. To claim the exemption, the contractor must provide a fully completed exemption certificate to the seller of the materials. The contractor must check other purchases exempted by law as the reason for the exemption. The contractor will write in exempt under 7754-9M Wisconsin statutes. The contractor should not include any information about its exempt entity customer. The contractor should not write in the certificate of exempt status number of their customer, and the contractor should not use the exemption certificate to document qualifications for the exemption. A contractor must also retain the necessary documentation to validate that its purchases qualified for exemption. A retailer who sells materials simply needs to obtain a fully complete exemption certificate within 90 days of the sale to be relieved of its liability for the sales tax on the sale. If the exemption certificate is fully completed and is received within 90 days of the sale, no good faith is required, meaning the retailer does not have to try to verify if the exemption is valid. Contractors will need to maintain records to substantiate all of the elements or criteria that they met to qualify for the exemption. A contractor should obtain the Wisconsin Certificate Exempt Status Number or IRS 501c2 or 501c3 determination letter from the qualifying exempt entity. A Wisconsin Certificate of Exempt Status Number is also referred to as a CES number. Caution: nonprofit organizations that the IRS exempts under another section of its code, for example, 501c6s or 501c7s, are not qualifying exempt entities for the purpose of this exemption. In addition, a Wisconsin state governmental unit is not a qualifying exempt entity for purposes of this exemption, even if it holds a CES number. For qualifying exempt entities that are not required to hold a CES number, for example, Wisconsin Municipality or the University of Wisconsin System, the contractor may retain the contract and invoices that indicate the work was performed for the qualifying exempt entity. State veterans organizations will not be issued a Wisconsin CES number. The contractor must document that its contract is with a qualifying state veterans organization. A contractor must maintain contracts and invoices showing work was for the qualifying exempt entity and the location of the property. It's important for the contractor to obtain and record information regarding the original contract with the exempt entity, if the contract was with another entity, such as a private developer, the Department of Transportation, or a general contractor. Form S-227, titled Contractor Statement of Building Materials Purchased, is available to assist in documenting the necessary information, but contractors are not required to use this form. Please note that Form S-227 does not ask about the original contract date, so be sure to note this date on the records that you keep. A general contractor should pass on the appropriate information to its subcontractor so that the subcontractor is able to substantiate claiming the building materials exemption. Some general contractors have been providing their subcontractors with an exemption certificate claiming other sales exempted by law, Section 7754(9)(m). This building materials exemption only applies to real property construction activities. The sale of a real property construction activity is not taxable. Therefore, there is no reason for a general contractor to provide a subcontractor with an exemption certificate for its purchase of a real property improvement. Some general contractors have been providing their subcontractors with an exemption certificate claiming exempt status and using its customer's certificate of exempt status information. This is also incorrect. You cannot claim an exemption using someone else's exempt status. However, a general contractor may provide the subcontractor with a fully completed exemption certificate claiming resale for its purchases of tangible personal property that will be resold to the exempt entity. The general contractor's sale of tangible personal property to the exempt entity is exempt from tax. The general contractor must pass on the information necessary for the subcontractor to properly substantiate the exemption for its purchase of building materials. The general should pass on the following information: its customer's Wisconsin Certificate of Exempt Status number, if it's a Wisconsin nonprofit organization, the IRS 501c2 or 501c3 determination letter if it is not a Wisconsin organization, original contract information including date of contract, that work is for the qualifying exempt entity, and location of the property. Again, Form S-227, the Contractor Statement of Building Materials Purchased, may be used to pass on the information, but it's not a required form. The form was originally developed for the contractor claiming the exemption to substantiate the exemption criteria in their own files. However, some contractors have found it helpful to pass on information to the subcontractors. That is okay. If a general is using this form to pass on to a subcontractor, the project information portion should be completed, but not the purchasing contractor portion. Just remember, the S-227 form does not have a field to record the date of the original contract, so be sure to add that. Also, attach a copy of the determination letter, if applicable. The same treatment applies to the subcontractor as it does to the general contractor. However, a subcontractor may not have the contract indicating the real property construction activity is for the qualifying exempt entity. On the bill of sale or invoice to the general contractor or in other documentation retained, the subcontractor should include the Wisconsin Certificate of Exempt Status number or the IRS 501c2 or 501c3 determination letter of the exempt entity. Include information regarding the original contract with the exempt entity, such as the date and parties involved. The subcontractor should identify the Wisconsin location of the real property construction activity. It is also important that the subcontractor verify and document that the property became a part of a facility in Wisconsin owned by a qualifying exempt entity. The general contractor should provide the subcontractor with necessary information about the exempt entity customer, such as the original contract date and the Wisconsin CES number or the IRS 501c2 or 501c3 determination letter. The general contractor cannot provide the subcontractor with an exemption certificate indicating the CES information of its customer. The general is providing the subcontractor with the information about its exempt entity customer, so that the subcontractor may claim the building materials exemption and have the appropriate information to substantiate the exemption. I hope that this information is helpful. Links to additional resources on this topic are available on the department's webpage, next to the link for this video. If you have any questions about this exemption or other contractor sales and use tax law, please feel free to contact the department's customer service representatives at 608-266-2776 or via email at dorsalesanduse@wisconsin.gov.